In this video, we're looking at obtaining information from the graph of a function. So you see this image, this very curvy line here. Some of the points are marked, some of them are not. All the points on here are marked, but there are also points in between on this function that are not marked. And we're going to see what we can figure out about this. And so just to refresh your memory, when we see f of a number, like in the case of f of -5 right here, that is asking us for the x value -5, what does this function give us? As in, what is the output when we look at the function when x equals -5. And so f of -5 is equal to, and we simply come down the x-axis to where x is -5. And from there we look, where is the graph relative to this x value? And we can see that it's right here, and that when x is -5, this graph has a y value of 8. So f of -5 is 8. Similarly, f of 0, we go to 0 on the x-axis, which is right here. And we see, where is this function when x equals 0? And you'll notice in this case it's down here, it's -4. And lastly, f of 3. We go to 3 on the x-axis, and in this case we look up to see where this function is, and it is +4. So we can look in the same way we do with equations, where we plug in a value into an equation to see the output. Here it is a visual. You look and see what is the y value that corresponds to a particular x value. Question B, what is the domain of f? Domain is x values. Now in an equation, we think about all the x values that could be used. When we look at a picture of a graph like this, we're seeing what x values are used. And so we're looking along the x-axis. And we're seeing from all the way left to all the way right what x values get used. And we're going to write our answer in interval notation, but interval notation always is the smallest value, comma, the largest value. So what is the smallest x value used? And that is this one right here. That's my smallest x value, -7. So the domain, and -7 is inclusive. At that point is used, that x value is used, so we're going to have brackets there. And this chugs along the x-axis, and there are corresponding y values kind of all the way down this, all the way over to 2. I'm sorry, 3. You see right there, 3. I said that wrong, 3. And so what you have to remember is domain is all the x values used. Now this is continuous graph. There are points all the way between an x value of -7 all the way to 3. It's possible you could have a break in the line. You could have a gap, or maybe some x values aren't used, in which case you might have like 2 chunks. So just be aware that it may not be one continuous piece like this one is, from -7 to 3. It could be broken into multiple pieces, and you might have to write multiple iterations of interval notation for the different parts. Now range is all the y values used. And so we're going to look at the x-axis, the y values. And once again, interval notation is lowest value to highest value. So we look, what is the lowest value, or physically the lowest y value used on this graph? And hopefully you can see this right here. Those points are at -8. So for range, the smallest value I have is -8. And it goes all the way up to here, which is a y value of +8. And so that includes all of the y values. The smallest is -8, and it hits everything in between all the way to 8. Some of them get hit more than once, and that's okay. Next question, list all intercepts. So intercepts, I'm going to erase a little bit of these lines here so we can see better. There we go. Intercepts are anywhere a graph touches an axis. So that's touching the x-axis, the y-axis, and the x-axis. we are including all those points because those are all intercepts. And so for x-intercepts, there are several of these. We have negative 6, 0. We have negative 2, 0. And we have 2, 0. Those are the three locations where this graph touches the x-axis. We also have a y-intercept where the graph touches the y-axis. And that's at 0, negative 4. Touches the y-axis right there. All right, next it says, how many times does the line y equals 2 intersect the graph? So y equals 2 is a horizontal line where the y value is 2. And so if we look at this here, so I believe our y-axis is each line is 2, so that's the 2 right there. And if I draw on that horizontal line, the question was, how many times does it intersect this graph? And I see it intersecting once right there, once right there, and once right there. Now, this does not ask for the exact points of intersection. It just simply says how many times. And we can count that it occurs 3 times. 3 times they hit the line y equal 2. Next question, for what values of x does f of x equal negative 8? Now, it's possible there could be more than just what's marked, but in this case, the ones that are marked, y values of negative 8. F of x equals negative 8 means the y values are negative 8. And that happens 2 times, and this actually says what are the values of x. So this, unlike the question before, which just asks how many times does it happen, this asks what are the values of x. And we can see there that when x is negative 7 and when x is positive 1. So I'm going to put a comma to separate those. Lastly, let me erase all this one last time. Lastly, for what values of x is f of x greater than 0? Now what this means is, it says f of x greater than 0. This means when the y value is greater than 0. On a graph, a y value being greater than 0. Well, the horizontal line y equals 0 is this right here. This line is y equals 0. That's also the x-axis, but it's also the line y equals 0. And this question says, for what values of x is f of x? For what values of x is this graph, does it have y values above 0, greater than 0? And so the important thing to note here is this. This is on the graph, but the y values are less than 0. They're negative. This right here is on the graph, but its y values are also less than 0. Those are negative y values. The positive y values, the parts that we are interested in, are this little piece right here, and then this chunk right here. Now this says for what x values. So for this moment, I want to know what those x values are. And so I'm looking from this x value right here to this x value. Those are the x values that include all of these y values that are greater than 0. And so this is the point negative 6, 0, and this is the point negative 2, 0. So the y values that are included there would be, it's from negative 6 to negative 2. Those x values work, but so does this little guy right here, which is from 2 to 3. So this is one of those where we have to include both parts from 2 to 3.